The day had been long. Tired but satisfied, I drove back home, enjoying the silence of the car. I had had several meetings at the restaurant I ran in my mother's name, as always. It was part of the strategy. Letting others think I had only just enough gave me a certain peace of mind. And Claudia never cared to ask about business. For her, as long as we had enough money to continue our comfortable lives, everything was fine. The house, our house, was what really mattered to me. It wasn't just a roof over my head. It was my grandfather's legacy. The place where I grew up listening to his stories about how he built every inch with his own hands, working until the last day of his life. Returning there every night was a reminder of everything he had taught me. And more importantly, it was the only thing I had left of him. The sky was dark when I approached the street. From afar, something felt off. The entrance lights were off. We always left them on, a habit we had maintained for years. I moved closer, feeling a strange discomfort in my chest. When I turned the corner and saw the moving trucks parked in front of the house, my heart did a somersault. I gripped the steering wheel, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Men I didn't know were coming and going, taking out boxes and furniture as if they were dismantling everything. I rushed out of the car, my stomach in knots. "Hey!" I shouted, approaching one of them. "What the hell are you doing?" The man, a guy who barely looked at me, pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his back pocket and handed it to me without much ceremony. "Foreclosure, sir. We have orders to empty the house." The world stopped for a second. The word echoed in my head as if it had hit me with a sledgehammer. Foreclosure. Couldn't be true. Not my house. Not my grandfather's house. I felt the heat rising to my face, the fury boiling inside me. "You have no idea what you're saying." I spat, trying to stay upright as my mind struggled to process the information. "This is a mistake." The man shrugged and continued his work. I watched him leave as if he couldn't care less, as if this were just another day in his miserable life of moving other people's things. I, on the other hand, felt my chest tightening, anxiety choking my throat. I walked quickly toward the house, not entirely understanding what was happening. Each step I took toward the door felt heavy, as if something invisible was trying to hold me back. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I entered the house, my house, and the first thing I saw was the chaos. Boxes, furniture, personal belongings, all being taken out carelessly. The place that had been my refuge, my connection to the past, was being dismantled before my eyes. "Claudia," I murmured, my voice laden with disbelief. She had to be somewhere. She had to give me an explanation. This couldn't be happening. I hurried up the stairs, skipping 2 steps at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the bedroom, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. She was crying. I knew something was wrong, but deep down, I still hoped she would tell me it was all a horrible misunderstanding. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice tense and my rage growing by the moment. Claudia's silence exasperated me, and the way she wouldn't look up only made things worse. Finally, she lifted her head. Her face was puffy from crying. The smudged makeup from tears made her look even more desperate. She didn't speak. She just sobbed, as if she couldn't even form the words. "What did you do?" I insisted, taking a step toward her. "I lost it, Alejandro. I lost everything," she finally said, her voice broken. Her words hit me like a knife. I wanted not to understand them, not to hear what she was saying. But there it was. I felt like I was suffocating. "What did you lose?" I asked, already knowing the answer but refusing to accept it. "The house?" she groaned, covering her face again. "I gambled. Couldn't stop. I thought I could win it back." She choked out through her sobs. But I can't fully hear her. She gambled the house. My house. My grandfather's house. It was as if the ground opened beneath my feet. Part of me couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. The pain in my chest turned into pure rage, a fury that took over me in seconds. I felt like my whole body was going to burst. "You bet the house?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. I couldn't understand how it had come to this. Claudia, trembling, wouldn't look at me. She kept crying, mumbling excuses I couldn't hear. Rage blinded me. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and threw it against the wall with all my might, watching it shatter. I needed to break something, destroy something that wasn't her. I shoved the bed over, not caring about the noise it made as it hit the floor. My hands trembled with fury. Breathing became impossible. Claudia, curled up on the floor, kept crying. Her whimpers barely reached my ears. Everything around me was wrapped in a fog of anger and desperation. I looked at everything being dismantled in the house, the memories, the years, the things that mattered. Every piece being ripped away as if it were worthless. It burned inside me. That house was the only thing left of my grandfather. I whispered, more to myself than to her, fists clenched. Couldn't stay there. I left the room, rushing down the stairs. The men continued their work as if nothing was happening. How could they not realize what they were doing? What it meant? I stopped at the door. I looked back one last time at what had once been my home. Now there was nothing left. I felt a wave of emptiness, but also a cold clarity I had never experienced before. I couldn't let it end like this. I walked out of the house without saying another word, without looking back at Claudia. There was nothing to discuss. What had been mine, what had been ours, no longer existed. The road to the cemetery was familiar, but never had it felt so heavy. I drove almost automatically, not thinking too much, letting the emotions take over me. The knot in my stomach grew with every mile, but I couldn't stop it. I had to talk to him, even though I knew I wouldn't get a response. When I arrived, I parked the car by the entrance where I always did. The cemetery was empty by that time of day, with the sun beginning to hide behind the hills. The wind rustled the branches of the trees and stirred up small clouds of dust on the paths. An absolute silence that only made the burden I carried inside me heavier. My grandfather's spot wasn't far. I had visited so many times I could get there with my eyes closed. I walked slowly, my hands in my pockets, feeling the tension in my shoulders grow as I approached the headstone. There, in that patch of land surrounded by other graves, was the only thing I had left of him, his name engraved in stone. I stood before the grave, staring at it in silence. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, didn't even know if it made sense to talk to him, but the anger and frustration I had bottled up began to come out in a way I couldn't control. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I felt the bitter taste of guilt. How had I let this happen? My grandfather trusted me with everything, and now it was all lost. I clenched my fists, feeling the pressure swelling in my chest. "I don't know how it happened," I murmured, even though the truth was that I did know. I had trusted her. I had allowed her to make decisions she shouldn't have made. I had given her everything, and she took it away from me. I bent down, almost automatically, and touched the cold stone with the tips of my fingers. I remembered the times as a child I would sit with my grandfather on the porch of the house. He would tell me stories of how he built the place, the sacrifices he made for the family, and how one day that house would be mine. And it had been, until Claudia destroyed it all in one night. Everything. She lost it all? I muttered under my breath, feeling the anger surge back. The pressure in my chest became unbearable. "Everything, grandfather. What you left me." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, breathing heavily. Everything I had built, everything he had left, was now in the hands of strangers. The images of the men emptying the house kept running through my mind over and over. The damned boxes, the footprints staining the floor, the memories being dragged out as if they were worthless. "No, I can't let it end like this," I said, more to myself than to him. The words came out before I could stop them, but once they were out, I knew they were true. I couldn't just let it slide. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly, and looked at the headstone. A cold, clear decision formed in my mind, sharp, like an inevitable answer to everything that had happened. She would pay. She couldn't get away with this without consequences. What she did, what she lost, would not be forgotten or forgiven. And I wasn't going to let her move on as if nothing had happened. I took a step back and stood there, looking at the headstone once more. There was nothing more to say. There was no longer any trace left of the person I had been when I walked into the cemetery. All I had now was a goal: to reclaim what was mine. Claudia hadn't just lost a house. She had destroyed a legacy. She had ruined my life, our life, and it couldn't just end like this. "I will make her pay," I said softly, though there was no one to hear it. I didn't need to make an oath or a detailed plan. It was just the only truth that mattered at that moment. I turned around, leaving the grave behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew there was nothing more to say. All that was left was to act. The following days passed in a sort of fog. I did what I had to do, signed papers, attended meetings in my businesses, but it was all automatic. My mind kept circling back to the same scene over and over. The empty house, Claudia crying, and that word resonating in my head. Foreclosure. Finally, the day came to face what remained of our marriage. There was no sense in prolonging it any further. It was like a body that had already been lifeless but hadn't yet been buried. I didn't want to stay tied to Claudia for another day. After what she had done, our relationship didn't exist. Plain and simple. With the divorce papers in hand, I drove to her parents' house. I knew she would be there. Since she lost everything, she had no choice but to go back to them. She had nothing left, and that was the part that reassured me the most. She was ruined and barely beginning to sink. I stopped in front of her parents' old house, a modest construction on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't what we were used to, but now it was her only option. I turned off the engine and took a deep breath before getting out of the car. I didn't know exactly what I was going to find, but whatever it was, it wouldn't change what I was about to do. I knocked on the door with my knuckles. A few seconds passed before it opened, and there she was, Claudia. She looked more fragile than the last time I had seen her, with sunken eyes and pale skin. No makeup, no air of confidence she used to carry with her. Just a broken woman. "Alejandro," she whispered, as if she didn't know what else to say. I raised the folder with the divorce documents, ignoring the tremor in her voice. "Here are the papers," I said, not giving her a chance to start any unnecessary conversation. "Sign." Claudia looked at me like I had just punched her in the stomach. Her expression of defeat was evident, but she didn't say anything. She took the papers with trembling hands and stepped back to let me in. I wasn't going to argue. I knew there was nothing more to be done. I followed her to the living room, a small room with an old sofa and a coffee table that had seen better days. Her parents weren't home, something I was grateful for. I had no intention of dealing with them. Claudia sat on the sofa and opened the folder, reviewing the documents in silence. The air between us was thick, laden with unspoken things. She wouldn't look at me, and I had no interest in seeing the pain in her face. I didn't care. The coldness I felt toward her left no room for any emotion. I just wanted this to end. "Is there something you want to say?" I asked, more out of formality than genuine curiosity. Claudia shook her head, still not looking at me. Her hand trembled as she held the pen. Then she began to sign, one by one, the documents that brought everything to a close. Each signature was like a period, sealing the inevitable. Our marriage had died the day she decided to bet the house. When she finished, she handed the folder back to me, and I tucked the papers away in my briefcase. There was nothing more to say. The silence in the room became even denser. I stood up to leave, but just as I took my first step toward the door, I heard her weak voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if those two words could repair what she had broken, as if apologizing could return the house to me or make me forget what she had done. I stopped but didn't turn around. There was no point. I wasn't going to say anything to her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of believing her apologies could make any difference. "I'm so sorry, Alejandro," she repeated, this time with a bit more strength in her voice. I didn't want to. I didn't want this to happen. I lost control. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I won. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the anger swell back up in my chest. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had already heard enough excuses. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice firm, not letting any emotion creep into my words. "This is over." She didn't say anything more, and neither did I. I turned around and headed for the door. Just as I opened it, I saw her parents at the entrance. Her mother looked at me with pleading eyes, and her father looked more tired than I remembered. Alejandro, her mother began, stepping forward. Please, don't leave her like this. She's shattered. We know she made a mistake, but please, give her another chance. I looked at her, feeling nothing but deep disdain. There was nothing to say. They knew what Claudia had done. They knew what she had lost. And still, there they were, asking me to forgive her. It was so pathetic that it barely warranted a response. Claudia lost everything? I said, my voice colder than I had planned. She deserves nothing from me.
No compassion, no forgiveness.
She did this. Let her face the consequences. Her mother's face filled with despair, but I didn't care. Her father looked at me in silence, resigned. He knew there was nothing more to be done. I walked past them without saying another word, leaving them there with their ruined daughter. To me, Claudia no longer existed. She was just an unpleasant memory, something to be left behind. I slammed the car door shut and drove away without looking back. The days following the divorce felt like a necessary transition. I had closed a chapter one couldn't keep dragging. Claudia was no longer part of my life, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something resembling peace. But calm didn't mean the end. Not while she continued walking around as if what she had done wasn't enough to destroy everything I valued. I had started the process long before the papers were signed. Contacts in the betting world, agents, loan sharks, all under my control. Claudia had always liked to play, always believing she could beat the system. It was almost tragic. But the tragedy was hers, not mine. I would just make sure to give her what she was looking for, a reckless fall. Reports came to me regularly. Through friends and acquaintances in the betting world, I was able to monitor how they approached her with promises of easy money, of recovering what she had lost. A bait too tempting for someone like Claudia, someone who had nothing left to lose. The first time I heard she had started gambling again, I felt something strange, a mix of relief and dark satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The idea of watching her fall slowly, of watching her destroy herself as she had destroyed my life, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. The calls came shortly after. The first was from Claudia's mother. I didn't bother answering. I knew they would come with pleas, and the last thing I wanted was to hear them. I turned off the phone and continued with my day. At that moment, I was at one of my restaurants, overseeing a new expansion we had been planning. Business continued. My life moved on, but Claudia was trapped in a cycle she could not break. Days later, another call. This time, her father. Same thing. I ignored it without hesitation. There was nothing they could say to make me change my mind. And even if there were, they had no right to ask me for anything. They knew what their daughter had done, and they did nothing to stop it. What did catch my attention was when one of my contacts, Enrique, informed me that Claudia had taken out another loan. More money, more debt. She still believed she could win, that luck would somehow be on her side. I smiled when Enrique told me, imagining her face full of anxiety as she gambled away what little she had left. She's going to fall harder than she realizes, Enrique commented, almost amused. She's closer to ruin than she thinks. Let her believe she's winning, I replied. The calm the situation provided now overpowering. Just make sure she always remains one step away from it. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on Claudia increased. Reports kept coming in, more detailed about her losses. I knew soon the time would come when she couldn't hold on anymore, when the reality of her situation would hit her like a hammer. I would be there, not to help her, but to enjoy every moment of her downfall. The next time her mother sought me out, it was different. This time, she decided to come directly to one of my restaurants. I saw her enter from the office I had upstairs, and for a moment, I considered not going down. But then I thought it might be interesting to see how low they would go. When I arrived in the dining area, she was sitting at a table, looking toward the entrance as if waiting for someone to serve her. I approached with steady steps, taking my time, and when she saw me, I noticed the relief on her face. "Alejandro, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice weak as if each word cost her a monumental effort. "Think nothing of it," I replied in a neutral tone. I sat down across from her and crossed my arms. "What can I do for you?" I knew what was coming, but I allowed myself to listen. "It's Claudia. She's in bad shape. Very bad." Her eyes filled with tears at the mere mention of her name. "She's lost everything. I know she made a mistake, but please don't leave her alone in this." I was silent for a moment, weighing every word before I spoke. I knew she was hoping I would feel sympathy, that some part of me still had enough humanity to feel sorry for her daughter. But what she didn't know was that Claudia meant nothing to me anymore. Less than nothing. "Claudia made her own choices," I finally replied, letting the disdain show in my voice. "She chose her path. Now she has to walk it." "Alejandro, please," she pleaded, leaning forward. "She's going to destroy herself. If you don't do something, I don't know how it will end." I looked at her for a moment, letting her words hang in the air before responding. What she didn't know was that I was already watching Claudia self-destruct. And I liked it. Each loss, each new loan was like watching a domino fall one after another. She had started this chain of events, and I would make sure it couldn't stop. "Claudia is no longer my problem," I said, the same coldness as before. "I'm not going to save her, and I don't care what happens to her. What she did, she will pay for, and she is already paying." I saw how the tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. I couldn't feel anything for her, much less for Claudia. "Please," she whispered, broken. I stood up from the table, giving her one last glance. That conversation had ended before it even began. "Claudia is a beast who deserves no compassion," I said coldly, looking at her one last time before turning away. I left her mother there at that table, knowing that what I had told her was the truth. And best of all, it was that every day, it proved to me a little more. As I returned to my office, I made sure my phone was on silent. I didn't need any more interruptions from that family. I was far too busy enjoying their destruction. Reports kept coming in, each one gloomier than the last. Claudia was trapped in a downward spiral that had no way back. Debts piled up, and her attempts to escape them became increasingly desperate. With each step, I saw her sink deeper into the pit she had created for herself. Far from feeling any kind of remorse or guilt, I enjoyed it. Every time a new report came in, I felt the same satisfaction. Watching Claudia slowly tear herself apart gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt before. It was almost like a game. She kept losing, and I stayed in control, watching from afar. One afternoon, Enrique called with an important update. "She's in serious trouble, Alejandro." His tone was more amused than worried. "She can't pay her debts anymore. She's been asking for more loans to cover what she owes. But the lenders are starting to become more aggressive." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window of my office as I listened. The city continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding in the lives of others. At that moment, Claudia's drama was just another story in the web of urban chaos. But for me, it was the only one that mattered. "Let it continue," I said casually. "Let them pressure her. She has nothing left to lose, but she still thinks she can win. Let's keep it going." Enrique let out a small laugh. "That will make her fall faster. Do you want me to keep monitoring everything?" "Of course," I replied, not taking my eyes off the window. "I want to know every move she makes. Don't miss a thing." I hung up and set the phone on the table, feeling a strange calm. I knew Claudia was on the brink of total collapse, and that gave me a sense of control I hadn't had since she lost the house. The chaos she had brought into my life was being returned, amplified, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. A few weeks later, the sound of the phone broke the silence of the office. The number on the screen looked familiar. It was Claudia's father. I stared at the phone for a second, contemplating whether to answer or not. I knew only more pleas would come, more pathetic attempts to change my mind. But something told me that answering this time might be interesting. "Alejandro, please." Her father's voice sounded broken, exhausted. "You have to do something. She's really bad." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. I didn't reply immediately. I just listened. I knew this would come, the moment her family could no longer ignore the reality of what was happening. "She's in over her head with the lenders. They've started threatening her. I don't know what more we can do for her. She has no one else." I couldn't help but smile slightly upon hearing the desperation in his voice. The silence that followed his plea was intentional. I wanted him to feel the same way I had felt when I lost everything. I wanted him to understand that this wouldn't end well for his daughter. "And what do you expect me to do?" I finally asked, letting my voice sound cold and distant. "I told you before, Claudia made her choices. Now she has to live with the consequences. Please, Alejandro." Her father's voice broke. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. Just help her get out of this. She's going to die if this continues." The fear in his voice was palpable. He was on the edge of total desperation. But to me, that desperation only reinforced what I already knew. Claudia had destroyed herself, and there was nothing I wanted to do to stop it. "Claudia is not my problem," I said, with the same coldness as always. "She chose this path. If she can't handle it, it's not my responsibility." The line went silent for a few seconds, as if the words were taking time to process. I knew he wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. Eventually, he spoke again, this time with more desperation in his voice. "Oh my God, Alejandro, she's going to die. We can't handle this. We don't know what to do. You were her husband, you once loved her. You really aren't going to do anything for her." I remained silent, reflecting on his plea. I had loved Claudia once, but that had ended the day she lost everything. What I had left now was to watch her life crumble, just as she had done to mine. There was no space for forgiveness or compassion, just the end. "Claudia is no one to me anymore," I finally replied, curt. "I'm not saving her. Let her face what she has done. And you, stop calling me. This is over." Before he could reply, I hung up the phone. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction from myself that never came. There was no guilt, no remorse, just a silent satisfaction. The same one I felt every time I received another report about how Claudia continued to destroy herself. Days later, while walking down one of the busiest streets downtown, I saw Claudia. It was an accidental encounter, but inevitable. She was sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a dirty old blanket, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a shadow of the woman she once was. First, she didn't recognize me. She just glanced at me briefly, as any person lost in their thoughts would, then looked down again. I stood there for a moment watching her. I didn't say anything. I had nothing to say. The spectacle before my eyes was the culmination of everything I had planned. There was no need for words, no explanations. She was where she belonged, and I was at peace with that. Claudia shifted slightly, adjusting herself on the sidewalk as if the weight of the world was crushing her. For an instant, she lifted her gaze, and this time she saw me. Her eyes, filled with an unfathomable void, met mine. But there was no immediate recognition. It was as if she could no longer see people clearly, as if she were trapped in a world she could not comprehend. I didn't look away, nor did she. For a few seconds, which felt like an eternity, we stared at each other in silence, until finally, she lowered her head again, defeated. I looked at her one last time and continued walking. The sound of people's heels rushing down the streets around me echoed as I moved away from Claudia. I could still feel the echo of her empty stare in my mind, but I didn't stop. There was nothing to be done. She was broken, and her fate was already sealed. There was nothing left to save. The reports that frequented my desk from Enrique now followed a clear pattern. Claudia was in total ruin. The lenders, who had initially been kind and patient, began to show their true faces. She could no longer pay anything and had no way of generating income. The little money she obtained continued to slip away in bets. She had gone so far in debt that she was no longer a profitable client, not even for the loan sharks. No one wanted her at their tables. No one offered her any more credit. Her last chance had vanished, along with any hope of climbing out of the hole she had dug for herself. One of those days, while going through restaurant documents in my office, Enrique sent me a message. "Claudia is on the street." That phrase, brief and contundent, confirmed what I had already known would happen. There was no need for more. She had hit rock bottom. I wasn't surprised. I didn't care either. It was the logical conclusion of everything that had transpired, of every decision she had made. In a way, it was the perfect ending to everything I had planned. Every move I had made since the day she lost the house had led us here, and watching the last piece fall into place gave me a silent satisfaction, almost imperceptible. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit. I was finishing reviewing some accounts when I heard the office's doorbell ring. I glanced at the security camera screen, and there he was, Claudia's father. His face reflected the desperation of someone who no longer knew what else to do. He looked paler, thinner, as if the weight of the last few months had completely consumed him. For a second, I considered not opening the door. I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with them, but something in me decided to let him in, perhaps to hear how low they could go with their pleas. When he opened the door and entered, I noticed the exhaustion in his gaze. He made no effort to hide it. "Alejandro," he began, his voice broken, "please, you have to do something. She's on the street. She has nothing left." I let him talk. His voice trembled with contained emotion, as if each word were a monumental effort. "We can't keep seeing her like this," he continued. "She's asked us for help, but we can't do more for her. She won't listen to us, we can't get close. She's completely lost it. We know she made a mistake, but please don't let her die." I looked at him calmly, letting each of his words float in the air before responding. I didn't feel anything at the sight of him. The compassion that others might have shown in his place wasn't in me. Claudia meant nothing to me anymore. I no longer saw her as the woman she had been, but as a remnant of what she had destroyed. "She dug her own grave," I said coldly, leaning forward slightly. "She took care of destroying her life. Now she has to live with the consequences. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not going to save her." The man lowered his head, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't say anything else. But then he looked up at me with desperation filling his eyes. "She is going to die on the street, Alejandro," his voice barely a whisper. "Is that what you want?" I remained silent, staring at him directly. I didn't need to think much about it. Claudia had made every decision that had led her to that point. I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my problem. I had only been a spectator, and in a way I had enjoyed watching her destroy herself. And if she ended up dying in the street, then it would be the consequence of everything she had done, not mine. "Yes," I replied coldly, not breaking eye contact. "If that's what happens, it's because she chose it." I watched the shock on his face. Maybe he expected some kind of remorse or thought he could appeal to some hidden corner of compassion I might still have. But there was none. He absorbed it slowly, as if processing what he had just heard, and rose to his feet with heavy movements. Without saying another word, he left the office, defeated. I sat still for a moment, reflecting on how little that conversation had affected me. In the end, everything was turning out as it should. A week later, while walking through downtown, I saw her again. This time, she was sitting on the same sidewalk, a worn blanket covering her. Her eyes seemed empty, as if there were nothing left of the person I once knew. People passed by her without paying attention. In the hustle and bustle of the world, Claudia had become just another face, invisible to everyone. I stood still for a moment, observing her from a distance. It was the culmination of everything. There was nothing left of Claudia. She was just a shadow. The woman who once shared my life had disappeared, and what remained was the result of her own choices. Claudia lifted her head for an instant, but she didn't see me. Her gaze was distant, lost in something that likely no longer made sense. The face that had once been so familiar was now just a mask of defeat and misery. I walked toward her, slowly, and when I passed right by her, she didn't even notice. I kept walking, never stopping. It didn't matter anymore. She was broken, and her destiny was already sealed. There was nothing left to save. The reports that frequently came from Enrique now followed a clear pattern. Claudia was in total ruin. The lenders, who had begun kind and patient, were now beginning to show their true faces. She couldn't pay for anything and had no way to generate income. The little money she received continued being lost in bets. She had accrued so much debt that she was no longer a profitable client, even for loan sharks. No one wanted her at their tables. No one offered her any more credit. Her last chance had vanished, along with any hope of climbing out of the hole she had dug for herself. One of those days, while reviewing restaurant documents in my office, Enrique sent me a message. "Claudia is on the street." That phrase, brief and to the point, confirmed what I had already known would happen. There was no need for more. She had hit rock bottom. I wasn't surprised. I didn't care. It was the logical conclusion of everything that had transpired, of every decision she had made. In a way, it was the perfect ending to everything I had planned. Every move I had made since the day she lost the house had led us here, and seeing the final piece fall into place filled me with a quiet satisfaction, almost imperceptible. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit. I was finishing up reviewing some accounts when I heard the office doorbell ring. I looked at the security camera screen, and there he was, Claudia's father. His face reflected the desperation of someone who no longer knew what else to do. He appeared paler, thinner, as if the weight of the last few months had completely consumed him. For a second, I considered not opening the door. I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with them, but something in me decided to let him in, perhaps out of curiosity to see how low they would go with their pleas. When he opened the door and entered, I noticed the exhaustion in his gaze. He made no effort to hide it. "Alejandro," he started, his voice broken. "Please, you have to do something. She's on the street. She has nothing left." I let him speak. His voice trembled with restrained emotion, like every word was a monumental effort. "We can't keep seeing her like this," he continued. "She's asked us for help, but we can't do more for her. She doesn't listen to us, we can't get close. She's completely lost it. We know she made a mistake, but please, don't let her die." I looked at him calmly, letting every one of his words linger in the air before responding. I felt nothing at the sight of him. The compassion that perhaps others would have shown in his place wasn't in me. Claudia meant nothing to me anymore. I no longer saw her as the woman she had been, but as the remnant of what she had destroyed. "She dug her own grave," I said coldly, leaning forward slightly. "She took care of destroying her life. Now she has to live with the consequences. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not going to save her." The man lowered his head, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't say anything else. But then he looked up at me with desperation filling his eyes. "She is going to die on the street, Alejandro," his voice barely a whisper. "Is that what you want?" I remained silent, staring at him directly. I didn't need to think much about it. Claudia had made every decision that had led her to that point. I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my problem. I had only been a spectator, and in a way I had enjoyed watching her destroy herself. And if she ended up dying in the street, then it would be the consequence of everything she had done, not mine. "Yes," I replied coldly, not breaking eye contact. "If that's what happens, it's because she chose it." I watched the shock on his face. Maybe he expected some kind of remorse or thought he could appeal to some hidden corner of compassion I might still have. But there was none. He took it in slowly, as if processing what he had just heard, and he got up with heavy movements. Without saying another word, he left the office, defeated. I sat still for a moment, contemplating how little that conversation had affected me. In the end, everything was turning out as it should. A week later, while walking down one of downtown's busiest streets, I saw her again. This time, she was sitting on the same sidewalk, a stained, old blanket covering her. Her eyes looked empty, as if there was nothing left of the person I once knew. People strolled by her without paying any mind. In the bustling world, Claudia had become just another face, invisible to everyone. I stayed there for a moment, watching her from a distance. This was the culmination of everything. Nothing remained of Claudia. She was just a shadow. The woman who once shared my life had vanished, and what remained was the result of her choices. Claudia raised her head for a moment, but didn't see me. Her gaze was distant, lost in something that probably no longer made sense. The face that once was so familiar was now merely a mask of defeat and misery. I walked toward her slowly, and when I passed by her, she didn't even notice. I kept walking, never stopping. It didn't matter. She was broken, and her fate was already sealed. There was nothing left to save. The reports from Enrique now followed a clear outline. Claudia was in total ruin. The lenders, who had at first been cordial and patient, were now starting to show their true colors. She couldn't pay anything and had no means to generate income. The little money she obtained continued to be lost in bets. She had gone so deep into debt that she was no longer a profitable client, not even for loan sharks. No one wanted her at their tables. No one gave her any more credit. Her last chance had vanished along with any hope of climbing out of the hole she had dug for herself. One of those days, while going through restaurant records in my office, Enrique sent me a message. "Claudia is on the street." That brief, direct phrase confirmed what I had been aware would happen. There was no need for more. She had hit rock bottom. I wasn't surprised. I didn't care. It was the logical conclusion of everything that had unfolded, every decision she had taken. In a way, it was the perfect ending to everything I had orchestrated. Each movement I had undertaken since the day she lost the house had led us to this, and observing the final piece fall into place provided me with a quiet satisfaction, almost imperceptible. A few days later, I had an unexpected visitor. I was finishing reviewing some accounts when the doorbell of the office rang. I glanced at the security camera screen, and there he was, Claudia's father. His visage reflected a desperation that indicated he no longer knew what else to do. He looked paler, thinner, as if the weight of the last few months had consumed him entirely. For a moment, I thought about not opening the door. I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with them, but something made me decide to let him in, perhaps just out of curiosity to see how low they would go with their pleas. When he opened the door and stepped inside, I noticed the exhaustion in his gaze. He made no effort to mask it. "Alejandro," he started. His voice shot through with emotion. "Please, you have to do something. She's on the street. She's got nothing left." I let him speak, allowing his words to fill the space between us. His voice trembled with a combination of grief and desperation, like each word was a monumental effort. "Please," he continued. "We're losing her. We can't keep seeing her like this." I looked at him steadily, letting his words resonate before responding. I felt nothing at the sight of him. The compassion that maybe others might have felt was absent in me now. Claudia no longer meant anything to me. To me, she was merely a shadow of the person she used to be, a remnant of what she had torn apart. "She dug her own grave," I finally replied, allowing the disdain to seep into my voice. "She's the one who destroyed her life. Now she must live with the like consequences of her choices." "Please, Alejandro," he begged, his voice almost breaking. I appreciated the emotion in his plea, pretending to listen while my mind already turned to darker thoughts. "She's going to die out there, Alejandro. Let her," I said coldly, indifferent to their suffering. "She made her choices. If she ends up on the street, it's exactly what she deserves, what she wanted, what she planned." The silence hung between us like a thick blanket, smothering any last hopes he might have had. He scanned my face for any hint of sympathy, but he was delivered none. Finally, I added, "And you, stop calling me. This is over." With that, I hung up, cutting off any chance he had of appealing to a more humane side. As I looked out the window, I realized I was exactly right. Everything was going smoothly. Claudia would eventually hit rock bottom, as I had always predicted. Days turned to weeks until the sunlight finally illuminated the dark depths of Claudia's world. One afternoon, While I was busy planning my next moves, I heard a knock on the door. I turned my head and saw Enrique step inside. "Hey, I've got some news." "What is it?" I asked, intrigued. "Claudia's hit rock bottom." "Really?" He nodded, his expression serious. "Things have gotten chaotic. She's lost her connections, her contacts. It's all unraveling." I leaned back in my seat, thinking it over. "Saw it coming," I said. "Just a matter of time." "Exactly," he replied. "I was honestly impressed that you managed to watch her fall from a distance. But it's been wild. Believe me, Enrique, it's not over yet." We both smiled, sharing the understanding of the game. I steeled myself for what was to come. With everything I had seen over the past months, I knew Claudia wouldn't stay down for long. The final act was yet to unfold. As I prepared for the next phase of my plans, I couldn't help but relish the thought that soon, it would all come to fruition. The time would come when she would no longer be able to avoid reality. I wasn't just going to let her off the hook. No, Claudia would pay for everything, and I was ready for that reckoning to finally arrive.